Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, Dopamine swipe.
What is going on? Welcome to the 817 podcast. Today we have an exciting interview with Marco Johnson and Walker Lutringer, two gentlemen who are a part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Fort Worth. Marco works at Sparkyard, which is a free platform for new entrepreneurs who are looking to grow and launch their businesses. And we have Walker Lutringer, who used to work at Accelerate DFW, but now he calls himself just a local, passionate guy who cares about our city and wants to see this be a city for the future for his kids and generations to come. These two people, I think, have great perspective on how we land when it comes to starting businesses as a city compared to other cities our size. And they share some great data on this pod around how well we do even in cities in Texas. And what you'll learn is that we have a lot of work to do, and we need to create some urgency among our leadership and among our community. And my goal is that when you hear this conversation with Marco and Walker, you feel more fired up to talk about how do we build a more entrepreneurial spirit in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, one of those things that we can do to increase our entrepreneurial spirit is something that Walker and Marco will share. And that is Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is November 7th through the 12th. And it's a week of local entrepreneurial events to get people excited about fundraising, starting and launching their business, getting the right connections and social capital, and building our overall knowledge in entrepreneurship. I'm excited to be a part of a couple sessions that week, and you're going to be able to learn more about Global Entrepreneurship Week at gewfortworth.org. Now, another resource you need to be aware about as we jump into this conversation is startupfortworth.com, which is a white paper about where we currently stand as a city. And so there's some great information in this conversation, and I'm pumped, and I look forward for hearing your feedback and getting all of you a part of the conversation, as this is something we have to all agree on, is that we have to do better at getting entrepreneurs here in Fort Worth, us seeing ourselves as entrepreneurs, getting passionate about starting something that solves a big problem. Because if we're going to compete at global scale, we have to create future forward businesses, as well as make sure we have the right talent and people here to curate that innovation. So without further ado, here's Marco and Walker.
This is Marco Johnson. I'm the Sparkyard Network Builder. I'm actually an employee of the UNT Health Science Center. And at some point, maybe we can get into why the Health Science Center is involved in the startup community. I know Cameron Cushman covered that on his podcast, but we can touch that again. But my Fort Worth story goes back to 2018 when I came down here to help a friend out with some teaching of some African students down in Austin. And he happens to live in Fort Worth. And I was between jobs. I just come back from Tanzania. My background is in international development. But we moved back to the States, and I came down here to help out my friend with his job. And I hadn't ever been to, well, no, that's not true. I've been to Fort Worth once in the 90s for a business trip, but hadn't been back since. And I certainly hadn't considered living here. And I got here and I'm like, yo, this place is dope. I really like it. It's got a cool vibe. It is not at all what I remembered it as or what I expected it to be. So I ended up getting a job with Walker, who's also on the pod today, at a place called Accelerate DFW Foundation, and parlayed that into this sweet job that I've got at the Health Science Center, where I work on Sparkyard and Global Entrepreneurship Week, which I think we'll get a chance to talk about.
So my Fort Worth story, my name is Walker Lutringer. I was born and raised in Arlington, Texas, right up the road, right? And so, you know, when I think about Fort Worth, I've got a lot of great memories about just, when you're growing up as a kid in Dallas, Fort Worth, you kind of have two cults of personality. You know, you might go out in Dallas and you're dressed up to the nines and, having a good time at some clubs. And then you want to kick back at a dive bar, and Fort Worth's definitely the place you go, right? And so that was certainly the case when I was a kid growing up. And I think that still kind of holds true. It speaks to the spirit of Fort Worth, where things are really laid back. It's, like Marco said, this is one of the things I love about Fort Worth is how laid back it is. I went to school in Arlington at Lamar High School, and at the time, I didn't realize it, but I got the equivalent of a private school education, and that really gave me a lot of opportunities to kind of follow my dreams and do what I wanted to do. And I've been able to transition that into a great college education. And then living out on the West Coast, I worked for a bunch of biotech companies, lots of startups on the West Coast, and traveled around the world a few times, lived in other countries. And I think, I've seen a lot of places, and I've lived in a lot of places where life is a lot different. And Marco has too. And I think along that way, you pick up some things you really loved about other places, and then you pick up some things that you did not like at all, right? And for the most part, I think Fort Worth is kind of a unknown gem in the United States, right? I mean, it really is a huge city. Our population is booming. And I think one of the reasons we're doing this is because we want our economy to follow suit, and we want to build some more opportunities where somebody like myself, I don't have to leave to pursue my dreams. I can do it right here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah. No, I think and last time when we had Cameron on the pod, we were talking about the problem. We were talking about the challenges of making Fort Worth a global name around innovation and just representing our growth. What is, it seems like, recently you guys also been working on white paper and really wanting to boost up Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is coming up in a month. What is some things that you guys are looking at now that you've showed the data, and now you guys want to move forward on what can we do to make Fort Worth a name in this space of creating a future forward, innovation, positive ecosystem?
Marco, I'm going to let you take a stab at that. I was going to say, EJ, you need to know something about me. I was talking to Marco about this earlier. I will go down the rabbit hole on some of this stuff because I just get excited. So you're going to have to cut me off at some point because I would just go down the rabbit hole, right? So, Marco, you want to field that one first?
No, Walker, why don't you go ahead? Why don't you frame it up?
And honestly, I feel like, the 817 pod, a little bit about our listeners is, I think we're a little bit more technical. I think a lot of people who listen to this is in industry or, regular listeners who listen on a regular basis. And we've had a lot of good conversations with Cameron, with Robert Stearns, with, city council, different people. And we share a lot of data, and we share a lot of, we want to make it data heavy, which is not always best for podcasts, but we also try to lead our opinions and perspectives with numbers. So don't feel afraid to just go off a rabbit hole, because I do that all the time. So
yeah, no problem. So I think when you're talking about this kind of stuff, I think it's really easy to go into the details, and sometimes we forget the why. So, I just want to take a couple of minutes and talk about, why is it so important that we have strong entrepreneurial class in Fort Worth? And I think it harkens back to something I said, which is, I want my kids to grow up in a city where they can have a thriving family life and a thriving career that's on the cutting edge, right? I don't want them to feel like they have to leave, right? And I don't want to see our best and brightest leave for opportunities that exist in other communities because they don't exist here in Fort Worth. And sometimes, truth be told, that's crossing the 360 line sometimes. It's simple as that, right? And I hate that, man. It really gnaws at me, right? I love going over to Dallas, but I really would like to stick closer to home a lot of the times, right? And so, when you start researching, when you start doing some of the data research, and you realize you see all these stories on Facebook about how fast Fort Worth is growing, but our local business community and economy is not keeping up with that growth. It's a population-based growth. It's not based on our economy. So we're not attracting people for jobs. We're attracting people here because it's cheaper to live over here than Dallas, and they're commuting. Long commutes to get to work every day. And that's why we want to do this. And I think the second reason is every dollar you spend at a franchise, or sometimes not a franchise, but, a business that is not based here, right? Target or, In-N-Out or whatever you say. every time you spend $1 here, that's $1 that's not staying in Fort Worth, right? That's going to support other communities where those companies are based. For Target, they're based in Minneapolis, right? So every single piece of profit they're making out of that Target store is going to Minneapolis to help Minneapolis, right? It's not going to Fort Worth, Texas. And I think that's really important for us. We need to start thinking about keeping that wealth that's created here in Fort Worth to help build our community.
I would add to that in the economic development sphere, we talk about the three-legged stool, and you've got two legs of the stool that Fort Worth does relatively well. That's the attraction of outside companies and the retention of companies. So we've talked about Smart Action, the AI firm that was just recruited here from California. We got the Rivian deal that's up in the air right now that we really hope we close on. So that's Robert Stearns and his shop over there, the economic development folks, the chamber. They're really good at those two legs of the stool. The third leg is entrepreneurship and homegrown companies. And we're talking about any kind of company, not just innovation-led tech. We're talking about the solopreneurs, the micro enterprises, the Main Streeters, the established companies, right, who want to introduce a new product or a new service and want to grow that way. That's where we've got a big gap in our economic development area. And we just see Fort Worth performing so dismally on a national schedule, on a national level, and compared to our Texas peer cities. And it's just sad when you look around and you see the talents here, you see the energy and the vibrancy and the potential of this city, and we're just not living up to it. And I think it's cool, like Walker said, that we both have this advantage of having lived overseas in a lot of different places around the world and around the US to see how other communities have done it. And we can take those lessons learned, incorporate that into, I know everyone talks about the Fort Worth way and we don't want to lose the Fort Worth culture. Frankly, I think some of that culture needs to be lost in order for us to be successful and do what we want to do. But that's what we're trying to do. So we're talking specifically about the homegrown startup company aspect here.
Yeah, Marco, I want to make sure I understand the three-legged stool. So we had attracting companies, entrepreneurship. That I missed the other leg. Retention. Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, and I think, Walker kind of talked about this when you said, what are the things of Fort Worth that needs to stay and go? I mean, I agree. I love the slowness of Fort Worth, and that Panther City feel of just, being able to have that slow feel. And then we also have like this very everyone loves each other, nice to have. We stay away from confrontation. Friction is not something we like as well.
Unless you're angry out on the roadway. Yeah,
exactly. Commuting all the way to Dallas. Yeah. So
right.
My other big thing is, though, there is also this we have this this I guess alphanism that we are good at business, that we are strong at business, and we do business really well. And we're a business friendly culture, but when we look at the data you guys share, it's Plano, Irving, all these other places, Frisco, when you look at technical jobs. So what do you guys feel there on how you're navigating all of that?
Yeah, I think that numbers really help in these aspects. I went to a presentation when I first moved back here. I went to a presentation that I think the chamber put on about, they'd hired a firm to take a look at the culture and the branding of Fort Worth, right? And one of the slides they put up, they talked about the things that, were really good going on in Fort Worth and some of the things that weren't so great, right? And they graded them. One of the things that was really interesting is we're one of the few large cities left in America where we have a large manufacturing portion of our economy, right? So I think business services was number one and manufacturing was number two. And I think a lot of people would be surprised by that in this day and age, that manufacturing is a big part of the economy in Fort Worth. And I think that speaks to some of our anchor employers, people that provide those jobs that have been around forever that we need to maintain, like Lockheed Martin. It's a big supply network that supports that manufacturing facility. And I really do think those things are important. I think the data also shows through the jobs report and some just ancillary thoughts that people have. We're not building skyscrapers in Fort Worth. We're building houses and strip malls, right? And one thing that means is Fort Worth, and we don't have exact numbers. It's really hard to get data around this, but I think most people, if you start looking around, most people might agree is one of the things we do great in Fort Worth is Main Street business. We have a lot of Main Street businesses because we have a lot of, retail space in these strip malls and neighborhoods, right? And I think we really have a strong Main Street business entrepreneurial class in Fort Worth. And I think that speaks to the spirit of Fort Worth. Like you were talking about, EJ, it's a nice town. You really can know your neighbors. It doesn't feel like a city when you're walking around. I know personally, I'm an introvert, and even I will go out to restaurants and I'll see 2 or 3 people that I know at restaurants in Fort Worth. And I don't know if that's happened in other cities that I've lived in that are the equivalent size of Fort Worth. And it's something I really like here. And I think that speaks to the nature of our kind of small town feel that we do Main Street businesses extremely well.
Yeah, I get a little confused on this Fort Worth culture question because EJ, you rattle off 1 or 2 of the things a lot of people talk about the slow pace, the friendliness, the neighborliness, and all of that. That's great. That's not unique to Fort Worth at all. There are a lot of places that I've lived in the United States that have that. So what do you think people mean? I'm just going to throw this back to you, EJ, because you've lived here longer than me. What do people mean when they talk about the Fort Worth culture and preserving that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's a separation of I think we have a culture of everyone plays nice. And everyone, I don't know if, you go to church, everyone's just kind of like, everyone's happy and nice to each other. And when you meet, that's kind of the energy is everyone's happy and no one bringing up confrontation is just not something you do. Or, I feel like what's great about your guys' data, which I would love for you to share some just for reminders and people who aren't aware on the 817 pod about the data, is we never really talk negative about Fort Worth. That's why I love, I radiated to you guys what you guys, the research at Sparkyard and all this, because finally, we're talking about the things we do wrong in Fort Worth. And another great example is the segregation of opportunity compared to the west side and east side. I mean, I live off of Lancaster and Meadowbrook, and, seeing Drover Hotel get made and all this alley, the alley and how beautiful that is. And then see my side of my community ghostless, and that's, you got to live in that, but no one wants to talk about that. District 8, where I live, $44,000 is the median household income in District 8. Only 14.1% of people in District 8 are Caucasian. Think about this district, right? And you would never know that in this perfect little fun Fort Worth that we all say is awesome and great. So that's what I talk about. And when I talk about it is sweeping under the rug the things we have to bring out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I kind of chuckle to myself when people talk about preserving the Fort Worth culture. Well, preserving which part? The segregation, the way the highways got built that cut entire neighborhoods off from the more affluent parts. Like, yeah, what part are we really talking about? So yeah, of course we want to preserve the friendliness and the neighborliness and the support. And I really do feel that the support aspect is very strong here, regardless of what neighborhood I'm traveling in. People do seem really willing to lend a hand and help out. But yes, there's this certain amount of pride of don't knock it. Fort Worth is great. It's great just the way it is. Don't mess with it. We don't want Californians moving in. We don't want, outside ideas coming in. And that's where I think Walker and I, by our nature, we like to slay sacred cows. We like to rock the boat. And we have different personalities, so we do it in a very different way. Walker's pretty upfront and direct. I'm maybe the more diplomatic of the two of us, but the result is the same. So you talked about data, and let me just, if I could, talk about where the data is coming from. So what we realized when we launched Sparkyard is that nobody's playing in this space. Nobody's collecting this data. Nobody's looking at Fort Worth and comparing it to other cities to determine, hey, where are we? What do we need to work on here? So Sparkyard as a platform, its main role is to connect entrepreneurs to resources to help them launch or grow their companies. That's our bread and butter. It's a free platform. We help any kind of entrepreneur, anytime for anything. But we realized that we had an opportunity here under the Sparkyard banner to do this data analysis and release it. And it's worked out really well. So we've been churning these data posts out for about the last year and a half, and it's not a pretty picture. And so part of our challenge has been figuring out, how do we convey this to the population? How do we convey this to the powers that be and the ordinary people? Walker talked earlier about the why. Why should they care about businesses being started here? And how do we talk to the city council, and how do we talk to the mayor, and how do we talk to other stakeholders about moving the needle on this? And we can use that as a segue to talk about the white paper that we were a part of. We weren't the only people behind it. This was a very much a community-led initiative under the banner of something called Startup Fort Worth. So it's not owned by anyone. It's not led by anybody. There are some wranglers, including Walker and Cameron and myself and some other folks, that have taken a lot of the comments and the information that we've gathered over the last few years and put it all in one place. And that's what you're going to find in this white paper at startupfortworth.com, along with the data that shows where our rankings are, what our rankings are, and how we're not pulling our weight or punching at our weight. And we also have some recommendations in there, recommendations for the city, for the community at large, for entrepreneurs, very prescriptive about how can we move the needle. And we're not saying this is the end all be all, but what we were trying to avoid is a blue ribbon panel that gets together and they bring in some outside consulting firm that charges tens of thousands of dollars, and they don't understand the community. And then that report, gets put on a shelf somewhere and dusted off, maybe, or maybe not. We wanted to avoid that. And we have this incredible opportunity with a new mayor and a largely new members on the Fort Worth City Council. Like, okay, great. Let's go. Let's strike while the iron's hot. Let's get them this white paper, hand them something that they can chew on and talk about and debate, and then start enacting some stuff.
I think that Marco is right. I can, I'm going to speak for me. I can't speak for Cameron and some of the other teams, but I feel like they're in the same boat. We do like rocking the boat, right? We do like slaying some sacred cows and doing it in public. And I think that's one of the cultural problems that does exist in Fort Worth is, we're a pretty conservative town when it just comes to the way we live and the way we think. And I don't mean that on political slant. I mean, we're reserved. We're not big risk takers. We don't want to put our neck out, right? We're not going to try anything like super, super not proven in the marketplace. And I think you can see that with our two mayoral candidates. When they were running, both of their economic development plans were the same plan. Let's copy what other cities have done successful. And I just think that speaks to the nature of let's not take any risks, right? And I'm pretty straightforward. I'm a person, I believe in, to be the best, you gotta beat the best, right? I want to compete against the best. And I want to be competing against Austin and Houston and Dallas, right? When it comes to economic development and attraction of companies. That is my goal. I'm just competitive in that nature. I don't want to see us miss out on opportunities because of, some cultural norms that we have in Fort Worth that don't exist in other cities, right? And I'm really straightforward with the data. Like I feel like, hey, you got to understand the problem before you can address it. And, don't kill the messenger. I'm people have accused me, you just hate Fort Worth. You have a chip on your shoulder about Fort Worth. And that's not the case at all. The only reason I'm doing is because I love Fort Worth. If I didn't love it, I'd keep my mouth shut and just, roll on through and take for my community and see what I could get, and then maybe move on to another city when I'm done. Right. And that's just that's just not who I am as a person. I'm put down roots here, and I want to live here, and I want to make this community a little stronger. And I recognize that there's a problem. There's a lot of barriers in doing that.
What is I'm surprised we're 30 minutes into this episode and we have not said a single data number. What is a number that you actually want the pod listeners to know? Like, I'm a big kicker of, like, when I meet any Fort Worthian, I want them to know these things. Or if I meet people outside of Fort Worth, I want them to know these things. And, sticky numbers. What are some numbers that you think the listeners should know about?
Yeah, I think I'll take this one first. I did some research recently. The initial round, I pulled 5 years of data from the Texas Secretary of State just to get an idea of how many people are starting companies in Fort Worth, right? Just from a procedural standpoint of filing the paperwork with the state of Texas, right? It's not the inclusive or clean data set, but it gives us an indicator, right? And I pulled 5 years of data and I compared it to other markets. And I think nobody would be surprised to understand that by far the biggest city, the city in Texas that's doing the best of this is Austin, Texas. To give you a sense, in 2019, 54,132 companies were filed with the Secretary of State that had an Austin address. That's a lot. So that, and the way I looked at this data is, okay, that's good, but you really need to normalize it so you can compare cities. So how many companies is that per resident, or how many residents per company are we talking about, right? That's one company for every 18 residents in the city of Austin, Texas for 2019. That is pretty impressive. I would not be surprised if they're number one in the nation, right? The problem exists when you start going down the list from there, right? So you've got Austin at 54,000. The next on the list is Houston, 31,000. Next is Dallas with about 24,000. Then you've got San Antonio with about 11,000. Then you've got Frisco, right, with 9,000. Then you've got Fort Worth.
Wow.
5,700 companies, right? So at the top of the heap, you've got Austin with 54,000, and then Fort Worth with 5,700, right? And when I first saw these numbers, I didn't think it was this bad, right? I knew that there was something going on in Fort Worth compared to other communities I lived in where you just didn't have that entrepreneurial spirit here. People just didn't seem to be interested in business. Startup community, you never heard it talked about in coffee shops. Nobody talked about it, right? And so I just started thinking, like, are there entrepreneurs here? Like, what's going on here, right? And so I felt like this is the best way to kind of get a preliminary answer. But those numbers are pretty stark, right? And so looking at those numbers just for 2019, I decided I want to go back and look at 20 years of data and see if this has always been the case. And I haven't been able to finish that analysis yet, but it really is interesting. And another data point, just to wrap up how far behind we are in Fort Worth, just having an entrepreneurial spirit across the board. The average for the state of Texas on how many companies per resident is 120 people for every one company. That was in 2019. Okay. That same year, for Fort Worth, Texas, one company for 157 residents. So we're well below the state average for entrepreneurial spirit, right? And so that's just another indicator that, our lack of risk taking, our lack of putting our necks out there in public, when it comes to this particular aspect of our society, entrepreneurship, it's really not doing us any favors. And speaking to the white paper, we got a lot of pushback on publishing the white paper without trying to discuss all the fine points behind closed doors, right? People did not want this to be a public discussion. And I just don't think I believe in that not transparent kind of approach to this kind of stuff. You got to throw it out there and let people hash it out and get the goods and bads, and hopefully the best ideas float to the top. That's how it works. You just can't say, well, let's not talk about this stuff because it looks bad, and shelve it right behind closed doors.
Yeah, and I want to just say, it's startupfortworth.com to look at the white paper, and it will be in the description. Marco, do you want to hit a little bit more on the white paper? Anything kind of important that you maybe want to highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. We shouldn't have waited 30 minutes to get into the data on this pod of all pods. So let me throw a couple other ones at you. We did a bunch of analysis through PitchBook, which is a proprietary software that tracks investments and company growth and all of that stuff. It's a really cool, powerful platform. It's not 100% accurate, but it's the industry standard. According to our PitchBook analysis, Fort Worth is ranked 40th in raising early stage capital. So, for example, we looked at a 5-year period, 2015 to 2020. Over that period of time, Fort Worth raised about $88 million. That puts us in the company of Omaha, Nebraska, Albuquerque, Bakersfield, California, and Louisville. Is that really where we should be? Those companies or those cities are so much smaller than us. They're hardly, Bakersfield, come on. They're 41. They're right after us. And they raised nearly as much, just a few $100,000 less than Fort Worth did. Yeah. So that's embarrassing. And then when you look at the average early stage capital raised within the 5 largest cities in Texas, Fort Worth, big surprise, is last. Average raise every year, 17 million. Next was San Antonio with a big jump, 48 million. Dallas at 236. Houston at 161, and no surprise here, Austin, 673 million. So that's early stage capital. We define that as everything from seed to angel and early stage venture capital. So clearly not punching at our weight here at all. Now, we did commission a report that looked at job creation from young companies in Fort Worth, and here the story's not so bad. We're doing okay in relation to other Texas cities. And actually, I need to qualify this. It's not by city, it's by county. So looking at 2018, for example, in Tarrant County, companies from 1 day to 1 year old started or created 25,000, a little over 25,000 jobs in 2018. So that's pretty good. That's not bad. It's really on par in Tarrant County with Travis and Bear County. But you look at Dallas and they're nearly double. They created 43,000 jobs from these companies, 0 to 1 year old. And in Harris, down in Houston, almost 64,000. So we're kind of middle of the pack there. But I think the important thing about that is that it shows, again, without any real specific intention or investment, that companies are creating jobs here. And we think this tells us that if we just put a little bit more intentionality into it, we can really move the needle on this and create that future industry base that is going to be the platform that Fort Worth is built upon 10, 20, 30 years from now.
The jobs report is really an interesting facet of what we've been trying to do. It's just people rally around numbers if you can give them something simple, right? And I think everybody remembers when Amazon was looking for a new headquarters, they were promising 50,000 jobs over a 5-year period. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what entrepreneurship can create, right? Just imagine if we went from that 157 residents per one company, we just took it down to the state average, right? Just think about how many more jobs you'd be creating at that point. I mean, the potential that we have to do stuff like this is really off the charts, right? And the interesting thing about the jobs report, one of the reasons I said one of the things I think we do well in Fort Worth is Main Street business, is that last year, or 2018, I think is what the numbers are, we create firms from 0 to 1 years old created about the same amount of jobs as Austin. right? Which is pretty impressive, right? But the one indicator that gives me some pause to think that a lot of these jobs were created for Main Street businesses and not businesses that are going to see a lot of growth, right, in our community is the average wage. So the average wage of the jobs created for 0 to 1 year old companies was only $34,000 a year. So that's, there's a lot of minimum wage jobs there, which makes me think it's a lot of retail space, restaurants, things like that, Main Street businesses, right? And they are the backbone of entrepreneurship, no doubt about it. But if you're looking for those companies to replace a company like Pier 1 when they go out of business, your local restaurant's not that kind of company, right? So what's the company in our future that's going to create 300 or 500 jobs every other year, right? That's what we need to be thinking about. And that's one area where we're lacking.
Yeah. What do you, man, there's so many ways I could take this. But I'm just curious on like what I see on the, like, for instance, on the startupfortworth.com website, there's like the question is like, what do you think we should prioritize as like the fastest way to impact Fort Worth? And so you have like these, the biggest and fastest way to impact: hire a CIO, hire a CEO, if you want to kind of know more about those things. But what to you guys, you feel like is the thing that needs to happen to accelerate the process for Fort Worth?
Yes, please. Yes. And I think that when you're trying to change a culture like this, right, the first thing you got to do is you got to set a sense of urgency, and you've got to create a vision before you can really get people to want to change. And I think those are the two pieces of bedrock that we have to really get done before we can really have the conversation about why this is so important. I think Fort Worth's at a point now where it doesn't matter what we do, we just have to do something, right? Just like an entrepreneur. The best thing you can do for your business is start, right? We just have to decide to start focusing on this. But I also think there was this perception in the community that maybe we didn't know what to do. So, Mayor Price formed the Fort Worth Now committee, right? And I think they did some great work, but a lot of their recommendations were things that we have already been doing, right? And I think people put too much emphasis on the exact details of what to do instead of just starting something. And I think I'm really impressed with what we've done with Global Entrepreneurship Week here in Fort Worth. We really started just doing a startup weekend one time. We planned it like 4 weeks before we held it, and that kind of grew into some of the momentum over the last 3 years. And last year, people might be surprised by this, but Global Entrepreneurship Week is a global platform, and Fort Worth was the biggest one in the United States last year. Fort Worth, Texas had the biggest Global Entrepreneurship Week in the country last year. And I think most people would be surprised by that. It was 84 different sessions, all oriented for entrepreneurs, right? We had attendance from around the world. We had people from around the world doing some of these sessions. It wasn't just Fort Worth, even though it's built for Fort Worth. We're having people reaching out to us from other places asking us how the heck we're doing this, right? Mm-hmm. I'm really proud by that. And it was not by design. We just started doing something. That's kind of what we did.
Yeah, I agree exactly with what Walker said. We just need to do something, and we need to have people rally behind it. I like the idea. If I had my druthers, we'd have a benefactor, an entrepreneurial benefactor that's going to come in and put a stake in the ground and make that a lightning rod and make it super cool and super sexy and bring a lot of money, but then get all this other money that's invested in other things or not being invested in all behind entrepreneurship. So let's get these family offices on board, right? That's what I'm looking for. Basically, if you're familiar with Kansas City, they've got the Kauffman Foundation up there, which is really the world leader, the one foundation that everybody looks to about how to support entrepreneurship. And that's what I want for Fort Worth, is someone to come in and be that person. and rally and just get everybody excited about it.
Yeah, I think the lack of interest means the lack of financial support. And to be quite honest, one of the things holding us back is we don't have anybody to implement. We don't have anybody to implement anything, right? GW is a great example. 100% volunteer. Nobody's getting paid. Nobody gets paid to do Global Entrepreneurship Week Fort Worth, right? If we had to get paid, we wouldn't be able to do it. We would not be able to do it in Fort Worth. There's just no financial support. There's no interest for this kind of stuff. And I think Kansas City is a great example. I think the Kauffman Foundation is great. It's huge though, right? And it doesn't necessarily do everything in Kansas City. But there's like 15 other nonprofits in Kansas City that all focus on entrepreneurship. We got 2 in Fort Worth, right? I mean, we've got Accelerate DFW and Tech Fort Worth, right? Are kind of the nonprofits that are kind of known for doing stuff in the startup community, right? And neither one of those are really well funded. And so I think that can be a struggle for our community. And I don't think you want the city leading. That just doesn't ever work out very well. It's not, entrepreneurship. You can't build an entrepreneurial community as a top-down approach. You can't be picking winners and losers. I think the medical innovation district is a great idea, but I have to ask what our competitive advantage is against other cities that have medical innovation districts. What makes us uniquely positioned where we can knock this out of the park.
It's a me too.
Yeah, it is a me too. It's not risky, right? People have been successful with it in other cities, but they also started 15 years ago, right? So we're 15 years behind the thought patterns of where things are going now.
Yeah. A couple rapid questions in the sense of you could say we don't know anything or you have some cool insights on. Anything about Rivian? I mean, this is going to be posted 2 weeks from this interview, so heck, we could have lost it by then, or we know that we're getting some success here. Do you guys know anything about Rivian or the approach we took, or was that all just like they knocked on our door?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not actually sure. I've actually been reaching out to some of the folks in the economic development office at the city to find out more, and they're pretty tight-lipped about it, which is totally understandable. My question is, if we're really serious about this as a city, what are the rest of us doing? How can we roll out the red carpet for Rivian, right? Yeah. Don't just leave it up to the city. Let's get an entire citywide initiative behind this and get people excited. Let's do a cool drone show or something. I don't know, put something together to make us separate from the pack, right? Mesa, Arizona, I think is one of the other cities in contention. I don't even know what
Mesa, Arizona.
Mesa. Yeah. So how do we differentiate ourselves and do something cool? That's the question I'm asking myself. And I would love to take that on, but we're so busy with Global Entrepreneurship Week. This goes back to what Walker is saying, the lack of depth on our bench to take these kind of things on. Like we're already stretched to our limits.
Yeah.
What about I know also the Health Science Center just got this like big, I think $100 million for AI kind of innovation to bring minorities into artificial intelligence. Do you guys know anything about that, and what's kind of the goal there?
A pretty recent announcement. We're super proud. Excellent job. The idea behind that is that most of the people working in AI are white, and they bring those biases, those implicit biases with them into the algorithms. And it's not necessarily anything that's on purpose. It just kind of happens. So the idea is to expand the pie and get more people of different backgrounds and diversity involved with AI, specifically in the healthcare aspect and industry. So
I think that's an important indicator of why some of this stuff is so important and why, Fort Worth is not a forward-looking city. And how is that working against us? Well, if you're not a tech company, in 10 years, you're going to be out of business. I don't care what you do. If you're not a tech-oriented company, you will not be in business 10 years from now, right? It's just the nature of the beast. Every company is a tech company now. Mm-hmm. And when you live in a place like Fort Worth, where you're really not inundated with technology on a daily basis in every aspect of your life, like other metropolitan areas, it can work against you because it's a foreign world. You don't know how to use it. You don't even know how to take advantage of it. And then you can't see the opportunities that exist, right? And I think that's a great example of how some of our culture is really getting the best of us in this area. Most importantly, we're just not an early adopter society.
Walker, I want to go back to you about, I'm actually really excited about Arlington and innovation. I actually argue with they're doing the best out of all the cities. I think UTA's kicking butt with the university growth, the investments, and artificial intelligence from a faculty perspective, the depth of that bench of their professors and their team. And then I just see the esports stadiums in there. Yeah. I think they're getting newbies to show up to Texas, right? Because of all the events going on there. So where do you see Arlington play? I always hear the talk about Dallas versus Fort Worth, but I actually think, you guys are playing a lot of middleman.
Man, I tell you, I love what Arlington's doing right now. And I did a couple of semesters at UTA and transferred out. Now, I have to say, what they've done with that university, a lot of people might be surprised. I think that they have the largest student body in the state of Texas, even larger than UT Austin. In addition, they're a Class 1 research organization now. And if you don't know what that means they're doing a lot of cool research and publishing a lot of papers and attracting top professors that are thought leaders in their fields. It's very technical in nature. Their engineering school is top notch, right? And if you grew up with me, I'm a early 90s graduate of high school. You think back to UTA and it was the South 40 parking lot and it was a commuter school, and you just kind of got, it wasn't a community college education, but it wasn't your top notch state of the art college education, right? Man, they've just blown it out of the water. So why is that important? And I think one of the things that people don't understand is UTA has a division called UTARI. It is kind of their cool secret research and development arm, and it's in Fort Worth. It's based in Fort Worth over near the is it Woodland Country Club? What is, I think it's like 820 and I-30. It's in that area right there, 820 and I-30 towards Arlington. But it's a big research and development facility. They do a lot of robotics, cutting edge IoT work, just a lot of engineering stuff there. I mean, they've really positioned themselves to be an attractor and a place that you can build a technical startup community around. So it's pretty exciting. And then the esports is blowing up. If you don't know what's going on in esports and you're still upset that your kids play video games, you have no idea what's coming down the pipeline, right? Because that is the future, right? It's not physical sports, and mostly because esports is the soccer of sports right now. It's a global phenomenon, and you think it's crazy here, go overseas, right? I mean, it's even crazier there, right? And, the nice thing about esports is there's careers in esports. There's careers as announcers. That's a real thing in esports, right? And so it's not just kids playing video games. You've got all the things, all the career opportunities that any traditional sport has. You've got managers, marketing firms, right? You've got these teams they set up. You've got finance, you've got accounting. I mean, you've got all the traditional avenues of career that you would have in any other industry. And it's the highest growing sport in the world. Yeah,
we're going to have to, 20 years from now, America's team shouldn't be the Dallas Cowboys. It should be the esports team in Arlington. So, yes, I would also like to dive into, I think the big kicker too is how do we pull off, San Antonio, I think really jumped up and thrived because of Rackspace, finding their own, who built $1 billion company. I think that's what a cool time to live in San Antonio. And for that to happen, I think that seems like something that would need to happen in Fort Worth is, can we get that kind of rally? Because then you bring the engineers here who work for the company, and then they want to be entrepreneurs. They kind of grow something, and you kind of then get geekdom and all the other cool stuff that's in San Antonio. What's your thoughts on how we do something like that in Fort Worth?
We're definitely waiting. We actually have a term for this. We're waiting for our Rackspace moment in Fort Worth. And can't remember if Cameron talked about this when he was on the pod or not, but Yeah, that's exactly what we need. And that's another way I could have answered your question about, what's the best way to get Fort Worth moving on all of this. So, and the thing is that we've had some really big exits in the biotech sphere here, but those companies don't end up being huge employers and they don't end up staying here, right? So what we need is something, again, that's homegrown, that's hugely scalable and really kind of sexy and interesting so we can tell that story and show people the power of entrepreneurship and why it matters and why you should care. I've got my eye on a few. I know you've talked about Brad Hunstable and his electric motor here on your podcast, and I think we should continue to be talking about that.
Yeah, I think Brad's a great example. It's like he's a good example of one engine of entrepreneurship, which is, if you don't know what Brad's doing, he's doing this electrification. He's got some patents on some electric motors that his dad made. But the real brilliance of his story is that this is his second company, right? He's a veteran. This is his second company. He built a company for streaming video back in the day. And I think this is a great example of how things happen just organically. He couldn't build it in Dallas Fort Worth because of the technical nature of what he needed to get done. So he lived here and kind of moved it out to California where he could build it. It was acquired by IBM, or not IBM. Yeah, IBM.
Yeah, IBM.
Yeah, and they locked him up into an agreement where he had to stay on and run the company. So he was commuting back and forth from Aledo to IBM in Silicon Valley every week, right? So he finally got out of that deal and he's like, okay, I want to start my company here in Fort Worth and this is what I'm going to do, right? And, that's one thing we don't have. We don't have executives from Alcon being like, hey, I got this idea, but it doesn't fit in the portfolio of what Alcon's doing. And Alcon's not like, okay, here's 3 million, go do it, right? That's how you get entrepreneurship going, right? Mm-hmm. You need people that are successful, some more numbers. There's another myth about entrepreneurship that it's a college kid that drops out of college and makes it big. That's like less than 1%, way down percentage wise. The most successful, or the average age of a successful entrepreneur, is 45. In the tech industry, it's a little lower. I think for the first year this year, though, it crouched on 40 years old. It used to be like 38. Mm-hmm. But also people in their 50s are 30% more likely to be successful as an entrepreneur than those in their 40s, and like 75% more likely to be successful than somebody in their 30s, right? So the game is all about experience, right? So you go get some experience, then you start a company, and we need more of that. We don't need non-competes. We need these executives starting companies, and then the management from those companies starting new companies, and it goes that way. And I think that's one engine that is extremely powerful that we just haven't been able to tap into here in Fort Worth. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we're kind of getting to the hour. There's obviously, I think we're nerds on this stuff and we could hang out and talk about this all day, but what are my last kind of question goes to, because in my head, I think it's the couple things, right? It's the rack space moment. Like we have, diversify the actions, right? We got the rack space moment. Can Brad and other Brads kind of pull it off? And then I think there's the other part is, how do you get really smart, talented, knowledge-based workers to want to live in Fort Worth? Like, okay, can we have the rack space employees come before rack space exists, right? And what is that magic? And so, a lot of my pitch to Visit Fort Worth or the marketing people is, we need to sell ourselves as the best work from home city in America. Like, everyone's working from home, and we have affordability, the 4th largest airport, work from home. You mirror that, right? WFH, HFW, home Fort Worth, baby. Like, work from home Fort Worth. We need to be a place where, these people, where Facebook's allowing you to work, virtual, Google, these kind of things. How can we get them to say, hey, we're going to live here. We're going to do it in Fort Worth. Those were some strategies that I think, as well as from getting the talent. And then the other big piece is education. And I think what you talked about, Walker, about the kind of jobs that we're starting, even though we're equal to Austin. It's retail jobs based off the salaries that those new companies are providing. I think there's a massive knowledge challenge about all of this. I mean, I work in education, and a lot of my work is with high schools. And I'll go into some junior, senior classes, and I'm like, by a show of hands, who here knows what a UX designer is? Zero. I'm like, you guys are about to graduate college, and you know what a top 5 tech job is, where the average UX designer at Facebook's making $250, and you have no idea what this is? So it's...
Yeah, my personal opinion is if you graduate from high school and you don't know a computer language, you might as well be illiterate. You are worthless to the current market for jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do a marketing job without knowing programming now.
That's why I feel like this, when I look at the thing, the Code for America piece to me is so important, is getting the kids to touch the magic. And then the creative burst, like, the coding is the magic. It's like, oh, wait, that's what this does. Like, you empower them with that. Then I feel like the entrepreneurship or the founder's DNA starts to, grow in them when they see the magic.
I think there are 2 really important things that you said there, specifically about creating a vision. Like Fort Worth is the work from home capital. I love that. So Kansas City did something 15 years ago. They said, we're America's entrepreneurial city, the number 1 city for entrepreneurship, right? And they just did it. They just declared themselves that. They weren't. There's no survey out there that even tracks that, but they just put a stake in the ground and they said, this is what we're going to be known for. And it's kind of an, if you build it, they will come approach. I love your vision. I think there are other visions that Fort Worth can do that. Brad Hunstable and Farouk Aslan with electrification. We've got physical therapy. We've got energy. There's a lot of different ways we can do it.
We have a competitive advantage in this area because we have a really big sense of the, what is it? The topo, what do you call it,
Chico?
Marco?
I was going to
Topo Chico. We do love our Topo Chico.
I was going to get into topophilia next. Yeah, you're stepping on my toes, Walker.
We really love Fort Worth. A lot of people love Fort Worth. Even people that aren't successful and struggling still love Fort Worth, right? It's like that city you love to hate and love at the same time, right?
Well, let's define topophilia.
Yes.
People that don't know.
Go for it, Marco.
So that it means love of place. And so that's the other thing you were saying. Okay, how do we get our rack space moment? Yeah, we got to have the people here who love their city enough to start a big company. So, and that's what a bunch of research says, is that you create a really diverse, cool place where people want to live and they want to hang out. And then they want to solve problems. They love their city so much, they want to solve problems. And that's what entrepreneurs do at the end of the day. They start companies because they want to solve problems.
Yeah.
And so I think, there are a lot of parts of the city where you get that vibrancy and that love of place. And that's why you are starting to see so many cool things come out of the east side and the near south side and different parts of the city. But again, we need more of that. We need the city to make those investments. We need the city to support artists and the creative class to make this a beacon for other creative, cool people with cool ideas to want to come and build here. So I totally support what you're talking about, EJ.
Last question. Just it's going to be a scenario. This is what I always say when I talk about this stuff in Fort Worth. But then I would love some action steps for listeners where they could get involved. So I always like to say the worst case scenario to people is something I've kind of coined as DFW going to DFP, Dallas, Frisco, Plano. If we don't start doing our stuff, the new abbreviation of this Metroplex is DFP. And I'm talking at the rate we're talking decades, but I'm still talking about this is the worst case scenario. I always have people in Fort Worth like, you got to stop saying that stuff. You're going to get them ideas. You got to stop saying that. And I was like, no, I want to light something under everyone's butt. So what is the action step that needs to happen that people were excited about Fort Worth? So the worst case scenario doesn't happen. Like you said, your kids and your kids' kids who want to live in Fort Worth and be here. What are some action steps people can take, and what is your thoughts on the worst case scenario?
I think to me, the worst case scenario has already happened. You travel overseas, nobody says Fort Worth. Nobody says Dallas, Fort Worth. They just say Dallas.
Yep.
Right. So that's true for overseas. and even in a lot of parts of the United States. So Dallas Fort Worth is kind of a Texas thing. So that may that worst case scenario may already exist.
Yeah, I think it's mindset shift. We've got to get people in Fort Worth comfortable with competing. And if we have to give away a little bit of that slow nature, then so be it. Otherwise, we are going to get left behind, and it is going to be DFP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think for action items, go to Startup Fort Worth, post some comments. I'll reply back. A couple of us are on there monitoring it, right? Look at some of the data and get involved, or go to a GEW event just to find out what all these crazy entrepreneurs are doing and what this whole thing is about, right? Like, just kind of come check it out. We're going to have probably around 70 different sessions. Don't you think, Marco? They're still being submitted. That's gewfortworth.org.
Yeah.
That's kind of a great way to tap into the startup community and kind of get your feet wet. And, that's for really anybody, even if you're just interested in what this thing is, or you just have a side hustle. Like, it may say global, but it's not like this huge, big thing that's only for serious large companies, right? It's really for anybody that's ever had any interest in doing their own business.
Yeah. And I know I'm a part of a couple events that people are doing on panels and things like that. So excited to be a part of Global Entrepreneurship Week. Well, thank you guys for giving us your time. Very interesting stuff. And I think a part of what gets me excited for living in Fort Worth is this part. As I don't know, we talk a lot of negative, but I feel like internally we are truly optimists as entrepreneurs. And I'm a decades thinker, and moved to Fort Worth in 2017 with the idea of this is hitting gold, and how do we influence and activate people? I tell every person who doesn't live in Fort Worth to come live in Fort Worth, and so. I'm excited. I think the 817 community is excited about the potential, and you guys providing avenues to activate.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate it. I mean, I'll just say that other cities would die to have what we have going on here in Fort Worth. And I think now if we all work together to a common goal of trying to build this, we'll do it, right? All the parts are there. We just got to put it together.
And EJ, shout out to you and Jimmy for the 817.
Yeah.
I'm a loyal listener. Love Monday mornings when it comes out, and I can listen to it on the way to work. You guys are talking about the important stuff that no one else is doing, and I really appreciate the platform. So thanks for giving us a little bit of airtime, and I hope we didn't bore people to death.
Yeah.
No, I think
we didn't bring up data until the end, so hopefully nobody dropped off.
Yeah. Awesome. No, well, thank you guys, and looking forward to seeing you guys at least next month, possibly in person at some events, and just getting to connect.
Sounds great. Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, EJ.